Help came from literally the complete opposite of American film producers, the Soviet Union. Kurosawa's work was as influenced by Russian literature as it was with westerns, Shakespeare, and the stories of Shigeru Yamamoto. And because of this influence, the Soviet studio Mosfilm came to him with an offer of adapting Dentsu Uzala, the autobiographical work of Vladimir Arseniev. Kurosawa had already tried to adapt the book in the past, to not much success, but now the country he had always admired came to him. He spent a year and a half from May 1974 to April 1975 living in and shooting the story of Arseniev, captain of an expeditionary troop in 1902 who meet a nomadic Goldie hunter named Dentsu Uzala, all of this on location in the rough Siberian wilderness. The story setting of the harsh world of the taiga in a part of Russia that borders on Mongolia bonds the two men together. Their friendship spans years, even while not seeing one another for long stretches of time, until Dentsu's eyesight and health start to get the better of him. His spiritual connection with the forest is also tested, and he tries to settle into domesticity, which just doesn't work. There is a calling inside him to go and be one with nature, something that he knows more than anything. This is the clearest allegory yet for who Kurosawa is and where he was finding himself in this period of his life, whether he intended that or not. Dentsu Uzala feels like the film he needed to make to just flex his muscles and prove he was still capable of crafting a moving story against the backdrops of unforgiving nature.
Слишком мал человек перед лицом великой природы.
The only real flaw in the film is that due to financial restrictions being a Soviet film in the mid-70s, the quality is still less than to this day. DVDs and Blu-rays still run from the damaged and worn-out 35mm prints made from a film that was shot in 70mm, and no restoration has been initiated. If any film out there needs to be saved and restored for the benefit of all people, it's the softly spoken and quietly moving Dentsu Uzala. Even after the film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 1976, Kurosawa continued to reject offers from television projects, always preferring the possibilities afforded by film. He continued painting more than ever before out of fear of just not working again, hoping to leave behind his new work as a record of plans he always had but might never come to full cinematic life, and he was wrong. 1977, George Lucas, Star Wars. The child of Kurosawa's works and many other influences which are detailed by the best podcast out there, the critically acclaimed network, and their new show, Episode 0. I wasn't paid for that, I'm just a fan. Lucas, like most of the new Hollywood filmmakers, took inspiration from Kurosawa and revered him as an all-time great filmmaker, and so Lucas was quite taken aback knowing that his idol was struggling to get another film made. They met in July of 1978, discussed Kagemusha, a story of a thief played by Tatsuya Nakadai, hired to be the double to a powerful samurai warlord, and chaos ensues over false identities and power lust. Lucas used his massive influence over 20th Century Fox to convince the studio, the same one who fired Kurosawa 10 years before, remember, to produce the project. Lucas also recruited Francis Ford Coppola, a fellow Kurosawa fan and heavyweight Hollywood director, as co-producer. Kagemusha often gets forgotten in the shadow of Kurosawa's following film. Even the director himself called it merely a dress rehearsal for Ran. But when you watch it today, all 3 hours, you do see a director taking full control back of his craft. From the first few scenes, the dynamic editing and vibrant storytelling is back, flowing with ease, now rendered in glorious color and giving you scene after scene of power. The story can be unfocused at times, as if he's still learning to pedal a bike at the right pace, but the retreat of Shingen's soldiers, the painful reality of the shadow warrior's situation, that he must live a life filled with blood and regret, an electrifying nightmare sequence. And two excruciating and exhausting battles of useless death and destruction is still thrilling to behold. Lord Shingen's banner flies the symbols for forest, fire, wind, and mountain, a quartering of his clan into that of nature. His army makes up 3 companies, forest, fire, and wind, and Shingen is the mountain, immovable. All of this is taken from a probably fictional aspect of the history behind the story, and Kurosawa contextualizes it within his love of nature on film. He shows that from his point of view, this disastrous final battle is man fighting against nature and winning. It is sad for men to die without need or purpose, and for Kurosawa, the suffering of horses, innocent creatures in all of this, is just as heartbreaking. 1985's Ran, in turn, is the more successful film of this reinvigorating period. Most of Kagemusha boils down to showing off the teams of horses and riders that Kurosawa can still direct into his late 60s, while still having enough narrative power to drive things along efficiently. Ran feels like what he was preparing for all this time. Thanks to French producer Sergei Silberman, this last epic would also be the most emotionally taxing film Kurosawa ever made. Another long shoot lasting a year was coming after losing Takashi Shimura in 1982, further plagued by the death of sound engineer Fumio Yanaguchi, one of his main collaborators since 1949, in January, and the sudden illness and death of his wife Yoko in February. Kurosawa took but one day of mourning before returning to work. Ran is made of 3 metaphors and allegories, the 3 colors of his life, the 3 colors of the film. Blue is all of this death and sadness that was starting to haunt Kurosawa's later life, a clear parallel in the film being the father and his wayward son reconciling. Ran is known as an adaptation of King Lear, but more accurately began life as an extension of the Mori Motonari parable, the warlord teaching his 3 sons the value of being stronger united. Kurosawa pondered, what if one son knew he and his brothers could never be united? What if the world, a godless and destructive one, never allowed for such unity? It was only after rewrites in pre-production that Kurosawa discovered the similarities between Motonari and Shakespeare's Lear, an almost cosmic synergy of the East and West, right there in his hands. This sweeping dramatic scope of multiple characters is what gives Ran its initial dramatic weight, but added on top is all the context of Kurosawa's life. Look at the portrayal of protagonist and aging warlord Hidetora Ichimonji, another stellar turn from Tatsuya Nakadai. In the chaos and horror of his own sons taking down their father, Hidetora attempts suicide. He's unsuccessful, struggling to find one blade, anything to commit harakiri with and end his pain. He goes about the rest of the film in a delirious daze, stuck in an unending trudge through all the mistakes of his life. Kurosawa wrote this as a parable to his own depression and delirium after attempting suicide himself, except in this version, Hidetora doesn't find acceptance and new life from those that he inspired, only more pain and destruction, but does find one fleeting moment of happiness reconciling with the one man he had slighted and taken for granted. Hidetora's youngest son, Saburo, is, to me at least, Toshiro Mifune, someone who Kurosawa most likely had regrets about ever doubting the abilities of. In this last period of the filmmaking sensei, he still wished for his friend to come back. They had reunited while Kurosawa was shooting Dentsu Uzala, something that I actually did not know until after I'd already edited this segment. They were also said to have resolved a lot of their differences at the funeral for their friend and fellow collaborator Ishiro Honda, though they never fully collaborated on another film project again. That is probably Kurosawa's regret. Kurosawa told Michael Wilmington in a 1985 interview that the secret subject of Ran is the threat of nuclear apocalypse. This is yellow, the color on the universal symbol for radiation. Kurosawa had already tackled ideas of post-war Japan and the depression his people felt in the years following Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the anxiety about another attack. But the 80s were another time of panic. The Cold War was reaching another apex. Kurosawa wanted to look at what ultimate destruction would do to good, God-fearing peoples, reflected directly in the last shot, a reference to a strange scene between Edgar and Gloucester in King Lear. Here, a blind man, blinded by Hidetara's ruthless past as a warlord, stands waiting for his sister to return and bring him home to safety. She is murdered by Lady Katie, another of Hidetara's victims and the main villain of the film, in her own quest for vengeance. The blind man, Surumaru, is humanity, abandoned by the gods, left standing alone on a cliff, waiting for salvation, and blinded by revenge. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. There's a final message in Ran, the third part, red, boldest color of the film, which contextualizes most, if not all, of Kurosawa's other Jiraigeki, the development of technology in warfare. Rashomon was only swords and daggers. Seven Samurai made importance of the Tanigashima, the arquebus, or the matchlock gun. Throne of Blood was a final testament to the awesome power of the bow and arrow. The Hidden Fortress had dozens of men gunned down instantly by the aforementioned muskets. Yojimbo's villain, Unosuke, tied his entire identity to his 6-shot pistol. Sanjuro was the last hurrah of the majestic katana. Kagemusha's entire plot was set in motion by a gun, and Ran is all fire and fury. The muskets, which spit crimson, devastate any enemy that an army faces. This weapon signaled the end of an era for Japan, and technology in the end will always win. Ran is the spiritual sequel to Throne of Blood, where that film ended with a note on the unending cycle of violence. Ran shows the world where all the violence has ceased and nothing is left in the aftermath. It is another masterpiece, the last that Kurosawa would craft, with the boldest colors captured by singularly brilliant cinematography, exemplary costumes, Oscar-winning, breathtaking production designs, and Toru Takemitsu's score, which left Ran as the most depressing and cynical piece of filmmaking I think I've ever witnessed. Our story cannot and does not end there. 5 years passed, Kurosawa successfully getting a nomination for Best Director at the 58th Academy Awards thanks to the lobbying of Sidney Lumet. Though Japan passed on nominating the film for the Best Foreign Film category, something about confusion between its Japanese basis and French production team, I don't know, it's arbitrary nonsense. Kurosawa remarked that his best work of all his films was simply his next one. Dreams is not better than Ran, but that's not really the point. Dreams marked another rapid departure from the cinematic output that Kurosawa had embarked on since his last rapid departure, Dodeskaden. This is another anthology film with stories barely connected to one another, only by a similar main character, an obvious analogy to the director himself, bucket hat and all. Somehow, Japanese studios still balked at backing another Kurosawa film, so in came another Kurosawa fanboy, Steven Spielberg, who coerced Warner Brothers to buy the international rights, thus allowing Kurosawa's son Hisao to secure a loan from Japan for the production costs. Dreams explores 8 distinct stories based off dreams that Kurosawa had had for years, all with different tones, cinematic styles, themes, characters, and even languages. The first 2 are of Kurosawa's naive youth, discovering moments of spiritual existence in the normal world before moving to 2 stories of surviving. One, survivor's guilt from World War II, and the other, surviving a blizzard. That one's really weird. I don't think I actually properly understood that one. The 4th dream, Crows, may be the singular moment of the whole film, wherein the Kurosawa standing character, the dreamer, travels into the world of Van Gogh paintings and meets the man himself, played by Martin Scorsese. Yeah, that guy. Okay, cool. For reference's sake, this made Kurosawa one of the only filmmakers, one of the only people to have in some way collaborated with George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Sidney Lumet, Steven Spielberg, and Martin Scorsese, all within the space of 10 years. In the scene, Van Gogh sharply questions why the dreamer does not paint what they see.
Why aren't you painting? To me, this scene is beyond belief. A scene that looks like a painting does not make a painting. If you take the time and look closely, all of nature has its own beauty. And when that natural beauty is there, I just lose myself in it. And then, as if it's in a dream, the scene just paints itself for me. Yes, I consume this natural setting. I devour it completely and whole. And then when I'm through, the picture appears before me complete. But it's so difficult to hold it inside.
This is Kurosawa answering that question of which person from history would you most want to have a conversation with? Literally, here it is, on film. Van Gogh leaves suddenly, and the dreamer chases after him, traveling through the magical worlds of Van Gogh's paintings, in a scene which not only was shot mostly with blue screen technology, a major leap forward for a director like Kurosawa, but was brought to life by industrial light and magic. Thank you, George Lucas, once again. Following this sensitive story is the horrifying and confronting double act of Mount Fuji in Red and The Weeping Demon. Lifelong friend and occasional assistant director Ishiro Honda would co-direct the first story, which is essentially a Godzilla scene without Godzilla, of man feebly trying to resist the encroaching nuclear destruction all around them. The Weeping Demon is set after the apocalypse, in which an Onibaba creature shows off a pit of other demons who are forced to endlessly live out the horrors of their former lives, never dying. Fun stuff. The last story is just a nice epilogue about the beauty of the old ways, choosing spiritual health over convenience, set in a quaint village that's powered by water mills instead of modern technology. The film ends with a funeral procession, complementing the beginning of the film, which was a wedding, and the final shot is of water flowing in a stream. Kurosawa is addressing all the horrors and pain of his life, the darkness and cynicism that has been in his mind forever, and just ends it all with a note of accepting his place as just water in a stream, flowing along and joining all of nature in the end. His final 2 films are really extensions of the ideas found in Dreams. Rhapsody in August is a conventional narrative of reconciling with the after effects of Nagasaki in the modern era, which is a nice idea but never really comes to fruition in the finished film. Most of the movie is about a long-lost brother who had an American son played by Richard Gere, who is woefully miscast. This is just a rather dull and far too quick story that's just retreading ground. Akira Kurosawa's final film, Madadeo, was in production shortly after, and while Dreams could have been the best final note for Kurosawa to go out on, I'm kinda glad it was Madadeo instead. Though it is a long film that could have had about 20 minutes shaved off and a few side characters consolidated, this story about an aging teacher struggling with retirement while his dedicated students care for him and celebrate his life, it's just too emotional to ignore. A whole section of the film is the protagonist Uchida in unending grief after losing his beloved cat one day. Another cat does appear in the end and stays with the professor for many years, giving him and his wife comfort, even after they've lost someone whom they loved as much as the child that they never had. Madadeo is zen-like in its peaceful contemplations about the weight of a life, more inclined to focus on how happy and energized this teacher has made his former students. He has one last drink with his dedicated pupils and goes to sleep, dreaming of when he was a child. There's a call and response that runs through the film, joyously sung at annual banquets for Uchida, where everyone would ask, to which he would respond delightfully. In this dream that Uchida has, this is repeated by children. It's repeated by him as a young child. The son of a military institute's athletic instructor, stumbled into filmmaking after failing as a painter and became one of the colossal figures in film history. An autocratic perfectionist with a painter's eye for composition, a dancer's sense of movement, and a humanist's quiet sensibility. Dozens of directors, spanning 2 generations, have acknowledged his enduring influence. A quote taken from the New York Times obituary, September 7th, 1998, for Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa was once a guilty blind spot in my cinema-loving life, but now he happily joins my personal pantheon of one of the all-time greatest visual composers. The pictorial Shakespeare of our time was not perfect. No director is. He was prone to exploring melodrama in many films. Overly emotional performances were often an awkward part of even his finest films. Some awkward treatments of female characters plagued other films, and he was known as an overbearing perfectionist by even the best and most dedicated collaborators. But he made things that have influenced generations, and subsequently created more of the greatest films ever made. And he was only ever as good as those masterful collaborators around him: cinematographers, composers, writers, costume designers, production designers, assistant directors, lighting designers, gaffers, horse trainers, sword masters, armies and armies of creative geniuses over 50 years dedicated to his vision and executing it with all of their hearts open. A classical and often objective filmmaker of complex emotional states that would swing back and forth like a dying man in the snow, always juxtaposed against the harsh beauty and unending reality of nature. Akira Kurosawa saw peace and purpose in nature, perhaps bringing him to find an answer to the often asked question, what are your movies about?
His answer was that they ask a common question: why can't people be happier together?
Are we ready to stop listening to this message by the sensei? No. Ma dadeo. Well, that took way too long, and now I have no energy. Thank you for coming here and watching my breakdown of most of the career of Akira Kurosawa. There were a few things I had to leave out. There's probably a few words I mispronounced. I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments below. Here's my ranking of all these films. I would like to in particular thank 4 videos that inspired me so much for this project. Brows Held High has 2 videos about Throne of Blood and Ran that are better than anything I could have done. CINEFIX beautifully broke down the blocking of high and low, and Every Frame of Painting, they just made perfection with their video about how Akira Kurosawa composes movement. Thank you to those channels, and so many more out there. You know who you are, that have inspired me to come back and do something like this. Long form videos, video essays, that's the kind of thing that I'm more interested in doing, and I'm going to keep going with that. There'll be more videos coming soon, maybe something related to something behind me, perhaps. I don't know. Thank you for coming back and seeing what's going on here. You can like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter. I have a Patreon that I set up. not really expecting much from that, but if you do choose to support me there, not only are you fully funding this operation wholeheartedly, you will also be my favorite person. That's a promise. Honestly. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you around.